Hi everyone, welcome to the session of the introduction of the special collection of International Journal of Project Management, Power and Politics in Project Management. First of all, I will invite Professor Stuart Clark to give a talk about power and politics.
Okay, that's it, great. Well, look, there are a number of approaches to power and politics that contributors to this special issue might choose. And I want to just go through a few of them and to point out some of the obstacles, some of the problems that might attach to using some of them. Probably the best known approach of the last half century has been Stephen Lukes's work on dimensions of power. But Stephen Lukes's work, while it's good in extending a dominant tradition in thinking about power, only does so in respect of one dimension of power, that is power over. And so he moves through three underlying dimensions to this shaping of preferences view of power. In the classic formulation of Robert Dahl, power exists when an A gets a B to do something that the B would not otherwise have done. And what Lukes does is to extend this framework by saying, well, hey, come on, that's not the whole of the story. Dahl would say that you have to see people doing power to say that power has been done. Lukes follows Bacharach and Baratz, a couple of community power political science scholars from the US, in suggesting that there is a second dimension to power. Bacharach and Baratz referred to it as the Janus face of power, the second face of power. And this is when B refrains from doing something because their assessment is that the powers arraigned against them are too great. There's a mobilization of bias in the institution or the organization, that the issue they want to advance is too problematic. It's off the agenda. It's a non-issue. So in this context, A doesn't have to get B to do anything because B intuitively works out what the score is in the situation and refrains from articulating a grievance or an issue that they, in other more propitious circumstances, they might not. Now, what Lukes does is to take that point and develop it a little bit further. He says there is also a three-dimensional power, a shaping awareness of interests. So let's look at the three elements again. The first, no, I want, if you can take me back, I'll tell you when to go. The first issue deals with preferences. It's about A's getting B's to do things they prefer not to do. The second one is about who participates, who defines what the issues are, how do they participate? And the third one is about what Lukes frames as the hegemonic conception of interests. His argument is that in specific circumstances, people are not aware of their own interests. This is a highly problematic formulation because it suggests.
Wow.
Sorry? Oh, this is a highly problematic formulation because it assumes that theoretically the theoretician knows what real interests are, and as I've explained at length elsewhere, that is deeply problematic. So this is a very popular dimensional framework of power, and it may be that people are working with these categories. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, the two-dimensional view of power is crucial for change. It's about what issues get to be on the agenda, what participants get to be at the meetings where the agenda is discussed. And obviously, one way of changing power relations is to introduce new participants to meetings. Those who are not normally invited, the young, the marginalized, usually on the basis of things like their language, their ethnicity, their gender, their nationality. So new participants can be invited to be on the agenda, and that way they're given the power to voice new issues, changing agendas. And clearly, this is very relevant for project management and for new directions in project management, because we have lots of instances of interests that don't get to be represented on agendas, community interests, stakeholders who are informal, they're not formally involved in the process. So we might see some papers that want to take that direction. Let's move on to the next one. So, as I've said, identifying real interests is tricky. The further we move from a scientific conception of them, such as in health and illness, the trickier they become, especially when real interests are attached to socially contentious issues. We only have to think about the present situation in the United States and the present administration's railing against what they define as woke interests to see that this is the case. Even in scientific conceptions of causality change over time. 100 years ago, it was regarded to be a pretty good idea to attach leeches to people to help them be healthier. That's a piece of science that's been long forgotten and long changed. So can people be mistaken in seeing what their real interests are? Because of ideology transmitted by mass and social media, through religions, and through other forms of socially constructive knowledge? Well, yes, they certainly can. But who is to say which is right and which is wrong? Is the person who was a sinner in the past and has become a born-again Christian in the present right about their real interests being those of the now or those of the then? These things are contingent and temporally, and in terms of the life course of the person, they would have varied. So a priori specification of what real interests are is problematic if a person's interests are seen as best defined by the person in question, which is, of course, the basis of consumer preference in the economics discipline. So let's move on. Now, what Luke's doesn't do is to conceive of any kind of power other than power over. Everything flows from that initial definition of getting people to do things they'd prefer not to do by exercising power over them. But power is always relational. It's not a thing. And that's why it's useful to think not only of power over, but also to focus on power to and power with. Power to do something, power as a capacity. This is power as positive. It's about making a difference. It's about adding value. It's bringing something to the party that would not otherwise have been there. So power doesn't necessarily have to be prohibitive and to be negative. It can be positive. And power with what Mary Parker Follett called coactive power, this is power that can be shared through collaborating with others. And this conception differs from power to, in that it involves the capability to achieve jointly desired outcomes by people working together with others towards a common objective. So introducing new participants not only changes agendas, changing agendas and participants can change the power to do things with others. It can change power to, and it can change power with. And so when we're talking about power, it's important not just to concentrate on that negative, prohibitive conception of power, but to think also of power to and power with. If we can take the next slide. And so here's a table which just very briefly demonstrates what happens to Luke's basic framework, which is the one on the left-hand side, the power over framework, if we add power to and power with to the framework. So if we add power to, we get actors striving to use the power to make a difference through imaginative future-making strategies that offer benefits to specific constituencies of interest in the one-dimensional view. If we want to proceed to the two-dimensional view, we can say new issues can be introduced to the agenda by introducing new participants into strategic decision-making with the power to challenge implicit understandings in crucial decision-making arenas. And if we move to the three-dimensional power model of Luke's, power to can point out the the fallacies in what's accepted in everyday strategic thinking when exposed to different theoretical understandings of what strategy might be and what strategy might do. Now let's see what happens if we add power with to this basic schema. If we're looking at one-dimensional power, then we can look at actors explicitly working by sharing power with others to achieve a common strategic purpose. If we're looking at two-dimensional power, by sharing power with others from outside normal fields of practice, we can see fresh issues and participants entering strategic decision-making. And in terms of three-dimensional power, when diverse interests do not coincide, they can be reframed by sharing power with others through deliberative democracy, which is very different from exercising power over others to pummel them into submission, as it were. So let's move on to the next one, please. Now, all of these models of power are important, but they're all structural. The notion of there being levels of analysis or dimensions of power is to produce a structural model of reality. For a number of years now, since 1989, I've been developing a model of power, which the basic representation of the model taken from my book, Frameworks of Power, is represented here. This is a process model of power. It's a model of power that assumes a flat ontology rather than a system of levels. So some researchers might want to submit papers to us which work from this process view and which work from a flat ontology. Very simply, we can look at the causal conception of episodic power relations as being constituted by social relations that define agencies who strive to use means to control resources to institute standing conditions in which their outcomes can be achieved. Those outcomes can reproduce or transform underlying rules of practice. They can change social integration and dispositional orientation. So they can work on the rules fixing relations of meaning and membership. They can fix or refix the obligatory passage points through which social relations are expressed. At the level of system integration, we can look at the way in which innovation in techniques of discipline and production empower or disempower various actors who can refix the obligatory passage points in consequence. And in both of these instances, whereas changes at the level of episodic power produces endogenous changes that can reproduce or transform rules fixing relations of meaning and membership, which can facilitate or restrict these innovations, exogenous environmental contingencies can do so as well. The best example I can just state of that is the recent experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, which had major significance for relations of meaning and membership, working from home, adopting digital technologies, which also were encompassing innovations in techniques of discipline and production, particularly a further digitalization of phenomena. So I think that there might be one more slide. I'm not sure, please. So the basic points. Any organization or its leader's power is always relational. I don't want to see papers that say somebody has power. Nobody has power. They may be relationally in positions of power. But if you took a photograph of a politician who lost office, they wouldn't look any different from they might have a sadder expression, but they wouldn't look any different from the politician who was in office. It's not the office itself, it's the relations that an office makes possible which constructs power. And these power relations are always multifaceted. There are some approaches in the literature which draw up lists of power resources. This is pretty dumb thing to do, really, because what constitutes a power resource is always contingent on the context in which it occurs. My favorite example of that is nobody knew that craft knives could bring down airplanes and destroy two buildings and kill over 3,000 people and institute long suffering pain and cancers and other diseases in a population. But they could and they did. And that resource was one that nobody ever thought about. Power steering is never infallible. Leaders think they can steer power, but they're often proven wrong by the turn of events, which is, I think, always interesting, because using power will invariably pose paradoxical tensions. And the antidote to paradoxical tensions is to cultivate paradoxical ways of thinking. And don't be surprised if getting others to do what you want them to do by exercising power over them fails. Others have their agency and will often not do what you or some other wants them to do. Moreover, they may be right in thinking that they know a situation better than you do. So the moral is that if you're involved in power relations or if you're analyzing power relations, be adept at either doing power steering or analyzing power steering. And above all, do it wisely. So that's just a few hints and tips. There are lots of references by myself and others that I'm sure you can find in the literature. My book Frameworks of Power has most of the arguments in it, but there are other more recent papers which take things a little further. So I'll hand over to my companions now, please. Thank you very much. So,
Stuart, I think that would be me now, right? So absolutely, power is so important and is so central to organizations and to projects. And surprisingly, we don't see as much of that centrality represented in the literature in projects. And that's one of the reasons why this special issue is put into life. We would like to see more of that because projects are a social political arena, and we need to understand and shed more light into power. Power very often ends up not being seen. It's hidden in the light. And we need to, as academics, shed light into it again and be able to see it, understand it, problematize it, rethink it. And that's what we hope to achieve with this special issue. So we don't want projects to be depoliticized, because as we do that, we kind of miss the issues of, for example, competing agendas in resource allocation, scope, priorities. We're talking more and more about future making, for instance, and future making is inherently an issue of power. And we need to address that also with power types of literature. Also in terms of stakeholders, as Stuart was mentioning, so often certain stakeholders are not listened to in a project context, and then overflows of that would then emerge in some kind of social opposition to projects, and also overall social opposition to projects in general. So now mega projects come with a huge baggage of opposition, and we don't actually talk enough about that. So, and this is particularly, I mean, it's always been important, and it's particularly important also now with new things that are emerging in society today. So as Stuart was also mentioning, power is inherently contextual, and our society is changing, and the way in which power is being is emerging, might be also changing, and it will always be kind of contextual anyway. But one of the things that we face today is, for example, digital transformations with a stronger use of AI, but also other types of digitalization that actually kind of change a bit and add a new type of stakeholder into projects. Another important thing is the grant challenges and how they also clash with one another. So, for instance, the last IPS report suggests that biodiversity goals clash with climate change goals. So even if we're trying to do good, whatever that is, there will be inherently clashes between different objectives. We also have kind of more obvious clashes between protecting vulnerable groups versus the speed and cost that we are being forced and pressured to do in projects, or how to reconcile those things, or the problems of ecological growth and the limits we currently have versus the pressure to grow. So thinking about construction, the best thing we should do is just not to build anything new. And yet, of course, we continue building it. So how can we actually engage with those tensions? These are kind of also power examples of power dimensions and power tensions that could be interesting to address nowadays. And then, of course, geopolitics are creating all sorts of issues in terms of supply chain, in terms of reconfiguration of how projects can actually emerge in between countries, which is also something that we see again and again, and also within countries to ensure their independence, for instance. Please, next slide, please. Thank you. So therefore, then we call for this special issue, and we are particularly welcoming a certain aspects. So we would like to see you engaging with power and politics, or some kind of closely related dynamic. So don't send us something that is not directly on that. So we also would like you to explore theories outside of project studies. So please go into sociology, political science, organization studies, anthropology. I mean, there's so many other places with very interesting theoretical background that you can actually draw from. So Stuart has given you a good starting point there. Like the framework of power that he has written, but also other places. So we would like to see some of those theories coming over to project studies. We also would like to encourage you to look at the narratives and things that are actually happening underneath the kind of veneer of rationality that we usually see in projects. Very often when we talk with project practitioners, they will display a certain level of technical perfection. But if we actually look behind that, you can see an immense amount of power if you ask around those things. Because power usually is often hidden in plain sight. So we would like the analysis and your paper to actually kind of show that, help us to show it. And we would prefer, if possible, for you to be thinking about power as a multi-level with several interactions, as Stuart was suggesting. This is particularly fitting within projects. Of course, you can do other things, but our preference is a multi-level understanding of power. In terms of methodology, so we're open to interpretative methodology. So we perceive that methodologies like ethnography, phenomenology, discourse analysis, interpretive design, so these are particularly interesting and useful for understanding of powers. Of course, you might also choose a more deductive type of work. So provided that it has a very strong contribution to powers and politics, so we will also take a very good look at that. And that's so much from my side. So handing over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. And next, the topics of interest. There are 4 research streams we welcome. We invite submissions across micro, meso, and macro levels, plus emerging frontiers. So we think strong submissions connect everyday project practices with broader power relations, what is decided, who benefits, who resists, and why. And specifically, the micro level power and decision making, how power shapes scope, resources, milestones, and the success criteria, who gets hurt, and whose knowledge counts when decisions are made. And we welcome topics related to team dynamics and collective action, conflict negotiation and consensus building in project teams, politics of collaboration across roles, professions, and expertise boundaries, and intersectionality, diversity, and power, how intersecting identities shape influence, wiles, and recognition in projects. And stream to meso-arena of power. And we welcome topics about power dynamics in project governance, how governance structure reflect, stabilize, or challenge power relations, steering committees, assurance, reporting, control, discipline, and resistance about this topic, and the stakeholder engagement and political memory, cooperation and conflict, tactical influence and persuasion, legitimacy struggles, wiles, and the politics of participation, and also the public-private partnerships and strategic alliance about these topics. And the third stream about the institutions, culture, and geopolitics. And for example, the lessons from major projects, legitimacy, resistance, accountability, and contestation, and how geopolitical tensions and global supply chains shape project strategies and risks, and also organizational culture and institutional power relations, norms, values, and institutional structures as enablers or constraints, and how power is reproduced through routines, metrics, and best practice narratives. And still was circuits of power constituting major projects processes, connect different levels of power or politics to theorize your research. And the emerging areas, for example, the digital things, grand challenges, and new forms of control and activism. And for example, AI and digital platforms reshaping control and decision making, and data control and new asymmetries of expertise inside project organizations, and about grand challenges, politics and stakeholder activism in sustainability, climate justice, and public health projects, and the new forms of legitimacy contestation, how projects become arenas for dispute, accountability, and public security. Next, I will go back to give floor back to Joanna.
Thank you. So indeed, very interesting topics. There are ideas for you to consider. So we of course welcome other interesting research that are not exactly those topics, but related with power and politics. So provided it has something interesting to say, so we are welcome to see it. But it needs to be interesting. It needs to make a contribution, and I think that that's kind of the biggest do of all. So an interesting contribution that is well crafted, that is based on interesting data and interesting arguments. So that's what we're looking for. More particularly, so please do problematize the literature. So we don't want you to only use references. We would like you to engage with the current literature and identify some kind of power and politics puzzles in a project context that would enable you to contextualize your research. Also, please make your theoretical lenses explicit. So as we mentioned before, we're looking for people that are engaging with theories from outside of project studies, more particularly organization studies, politics, political science, sociology. So theories like circuits of power, institutional theory, intersectionality, geopolitics. So those are the kind of theories that we would like to see and would like you to engage with them. Also, having said that, so despite having this strong theoretical underpinning, we would like you to make a solid contribution to projects and organization studies and political perspectives, or through an organization and political perspectives stance. So please don't just make something that is completely unrelated with projects. Another thing is that we would like, of course, for you to have a close method question fit. So however you would like to design your methodology, that needs to be connected with your problematization, the theory you use, and the research questions. So make sure that you keep with your onto-epistemological commitments as soon as you have them, and have a research method that clearly addresses the question and enables you to develop interesting findings. Also, when we actually get into more towards the end and your development of your findings, make sure that you actually make an analysis of the data that is based on your data and showcase the data in the paper. I mean, these are kind of basic things for any kind of good article, and make sure that also the discussions are going back to the literature and kind of very clearly articulating this clear contribution that you make to the literature. I think one more thing that is important is just to make sure that power is not only on the background. So this is about power and politics. So power and politics should be on the foreground. So I think these are the most important aspects to say. So we're going to the next slide. So now moving on into the path of submission. So we have, first of all, the first optional part, which is if you have an idea and you're considering whether that could fit this special issue, you have the opportunity of submitting an extended abstract. So this is optional. And you can see, so it's between 800 and 1,000 words. So please send the abstract up to the 1st of April. Then we're going to provide to those people that actually have given this abstract a author's workshop. So where we will be able to help people that send us the abstract and suggest avenues. So from the abstracts that we've chosen, we will develop the workshop and help them develop their article further. So this is going to be online and is going to take place sometime in May. So, and then from there, we are going to be inviting for full paper publications. And then we are going to have the full paper submission, so you can also go directly in there, and that is the 31st of August. And this is going to be taking place directly in the International Journal of Project Management submission page. So when you enter into the submission of the International Journal of Project Management, you can choose our special issue, and then you submit the article through the system. All papers are going to go through a classic double-blind review process, which we'll be engaging with, and we aim at a publication in, which year was it? Next year, right? Next year. That's it from our side. Any questions?
Well, I think we can say that we really do look forward to receiving some great submissions from hopefully all of you. We will enjoy engaging with them as editors, and where we can, we'll help. And you know, obviously, we'll be guided by our reviewers, but we'll try to be as constructive as possible within the tolerances that our reviewers allow for us. So it's obviously it's the normal kind of academic dice game, you know. But we're not bad people, and we'll certainly try and help. So we do hope to get some great applications from you, some great submissions.